If you're an HR professional who works hard to fill roles within your company, keep employees engaged, and build company culture, welcome to America Back to Work, where dreams only work if we do. We'll share wide-ranging issues surrounding pre-employment background screening, HR topics such as recruiting, hiring, labor trends, and company culture, as well as broader HR-influenced business topics such as customer experience, service level excellence, and protecting what matters through best practices in prevention, protection, and corporate security. America Back to Work is brought to you by S2 Verify. Here's your host, Arnette Heintze.
Welcome to America Back to Work, brought to you by S2 Verify, where our purpose is to help you hire with confidence and manage insider risk. I'm your host, Arnette Heintze. Thank you for joining. Today, our guest is Sharon O'Donnell. Sharon is the founder of OHR Consulting, where she provides growing companies with a dedicated resource for strategic human capital projects. Sharon has over 20 years of HR experience, a degree in organizational management, and the coveted SPHR certification. Her journey began as a headhunter and has evolved into formal organizational management for organizations of all sizes. Sharon, thank you again. And would you mind sharing a bit more about yourself and your career? And frankly, I'd love to know if the organizational challenges associated with being one of 8 siblings factored into your career choice.
So funny enough, yes, but probably not in the way that you think. So I'm actually the youngest of 8, and I have over 40 nieces, nephews, great nieces, and great nephews. So my first career choice was early childhood education.
That's quite a family right there.
I have plenty of child experience that I never needed to have my own.
That's wonderful. Well, what experiences in your background led you to establishing OHR Consulting? What led you down that path?
Like I said, I was a teacher, and from teaching, I got a little burnt out and also was getting a little poor. And I had friends who worked in the headhunting business, and they encouraged me to come work with them. I didn't even realize at the time that was getting into HR until I transitioned from a headhunting organization into in-house law firm HR. And then there, I kind of cut my teeth on a bunch of different aspects. I worked closely with the benefits administrators. I ended up taking over the professional development department. I became the affirmative action officer. The company that I worked for at that time was very large. So I got very pigeonholed in my experience, and I like to do a lot of diverse things. So I ended up taking that experience into much smaller companies where I could build and I could develop. And I worked in e-discovery companies, marketing companies, associations. And then the last company that I worked for prior to going out on my own was a private equity-backed company that had actually been in existence for about 15 years, but had never had an HR person. And I came in and built all of their structures, all of their processes, got them to the point of sale, took my payout, and started OHR.
Fabulous. So I know one of the areas that you're really passionate about is transparent leadership techniques and how they affect employee trust and retention. So I'd like to understand from you, what lessons about leadership do you think organizations learned over the last couple of years as America's gotten back to work, and especially for us having come out of a pandemic?
So I think there's been a lot of lessons. I don't know that, I think a lot of them have been being learned even prior to the pandemic, and then were solidified during the pandemic when employees started to drive a lot of lessons. I think they were the ones who are actually employees are now doing the teaching. And employers are going to have to pivot, or they're going to have to suffer the consequences. So I think I'll kind of focus on 3 for you and just see if that answers your question. I think one is, gone are the days of blind employee loyalty, right? Like, people don't last at jobs for 15, 20 years anymore. And these younger and younger generations want to know, like, why should I stay here? What are you going to do for me? How can I still grow and learn and develop? And if you as an employer aren't giving me that path, then I'm moving on. So I think that is one lesson. Another lesson is, gone are the days of don't ask, don't tell as far as compensation. Every single employee you have probably knows what all their peers are making, right? They're all talking about it. They know the bonus you got. They know the raise you got. They know when you got your last raise. They're all talking about it. So I think there are quite a few employers who are still trying to keep that information confidential, and they're doing a disservice to themselves instead of just publishing. This is what we do. This is how we do it. This is why we do it. Your employees then know the path to get to the next spot versus assuming you don't have a path and moving on. And then I think probably the third one is also that rigid corporate structure that used to exist think of like the chain of command, right? The employee X never got to communicate with the director or the CEO. They never got their voice heard, and now they just don't have the faith that what they want to say is getting there. So I think there needs to be a communication path to the top. You need to be able to make sure that your employees feel like they're being heard. I have this one client that does this really, really well. And it blew my mind when I witnessed it because I was like, how are you accomplishing this? They do a weekly 15-minute all company, all hands. It's beautifully executed. So the staff in the departments elevate their thoughts, questions, comments, initiatives to their heads of their departments. The heads of the departments boil that down and send it to HR. HR builds a 15-minute agenda, saving 5 minutes for shout outs. And then the CEO always attends. Out of 150 people in the company, I don't think I ever saw less than 100 on the call. And anytime there's like a complex topic, the department will say, this is what we're doing. Don't forget, this happens on May 5th. Mark your calendar now. If you need additional information, here's where you go to find it. So it's very constructive. It's very directional. It's very action oriented. And I think if companies aren't giving their employees that real-time information, they're going to lose them.
Oh, that's a fabulous observation. As you outlined your three areas to the question, it struck me that the issue for a lot of folks like me is our generation. We're that boomer generation. So that issue about the discussion about compensation was very prohibited, in my generation, entering the workforce and stuff. But I think you're right. I think if you publish your structure on paying for performance and what it means, then if somebody's not making as much as their person next to them, maybe they've got to step up their game. And I think that's really transparent. So, you hear plenty of people saying they're entering, toxic work cultures and leaders are communicating poorly. What do you think stops organizations from acting on all the knowledge about culture we've gained collectively in the last couple of years? I know you gave a great example right there where one of your clients does a weekly meeting, and I think that's phenomenal. So how do you think, what's impacting organizations with this toxic culture?
I think honestly, the biggest factor is fear. At the end, like you said, we've got a multi-generational workforce, and the people who are potentially at the top are very, divided from the people at the bottom, and the needs are very divided. So I think that, I like to give the example of an attorney who makes managing partner, an engineer or a finance major who makes it to CEO, or the data analyst who becomes director of technology. All these people went through years and years and years of education to master their craft. And at no point in time was communication 101 on that agenda. Right now, all of a sudden, they're responsible for not just themselves. They're not just on the line. They're responsible for the 20 people on the line. And everybody just put them in that spot. And they never put like that whole new skill, people 101, on the agenda. So companies have to do a better job of training people on people skills. How do you communicate hard topics? How do you say things honestly in a non-painful way, right? These are not easy skills to learn, but they are learnable with education and training.
Great. So let's dive into this transparent leadership issue. And how can you tell if leadership is not transparent? And what does, good, transparent leadership look like?
I go back to, Is leadership doing what they say and saying what they do, right? If they're publishing core values, are they then holding people accountable to live up to them? So I'll give you two anecdotes of two clients that I've had. Well, I say two clients. Both of them were former employers that I worked with in the past. Both of these are major heads of organizations. So in one case, we've got the CEO who pushes his executive team to develop core values. He says, we're 3 years old. We need core values. We need to know who we are. We need to tell everybody who we are. We need to make sure our employees know who we are. He gets them all out there, integrity, expertise, resilience, partnership, initiative. So very clean cut, you know what most of those words mean. But then when it's time to actually roll them out, the company does everything right. They put it on their website. They add it to employee evaluations. They even add it to executive compensation bonus metrics, right? But then the wheels fall off. The CEO repeatedly gossips about the leadership team, putting one against the other. The head of operations fails to respond to any of their staff's emails. Staff are dinged on their performance evaluations, therefore dinged on their compensation increases because they're not living the core value. But the executives who are also not living core values are getting their full bonuses. Requests for education from a company who touts expertise as one of their core values, requests for education reimbursements are denied, right? Like, so they're not, they put this thing out there, and then from the top down, it's not being lived. All behaviors in direct opposition of the developed core values. On the other side, you have a CHRO who's brand new to a company and gets everybody in there, pulls everybody into the meeting, 20-person, 25-person department, everybody from interns to executives, and starts the conversation by telling everyone, I'm so happy to be here. I'm excited for all of the initiatives that have been put on my plate because you guys seem like an amazing team, and you're all going to be involved. They follow them up by telling the staff that as part of this team, they will have her full support. She clarifies that trust is not earned under her. It is expected. And to the extent that you lose her trust, you will be terminated. She's very clear about her expectations. Over the next 3 years, a huge reduction in force hits the company. She engages the entire team to support this initiative, ensures that they hold confidentiality tight, ensures that it's done fairly and empathetically, to the point where even employees who were terminated came back with thanks and gratitude for how the situation was handled and the people who handled it. Diversity initiatives were at risk because of staffing shortages, and this chief officer stayed late and helped people get things accomplished and bought them dinner to make sure that they felt appreciated. And at the end of all these initiatives, the entire company voted this chief officer, the core values, winner for an entire year. And she was only like 3 years into the company, living what she was saying.
That's so true. Leadership has to live what they say. So now, is it possible to be too transparent in an organization, and where do organizations draw the line typically?
I think absolutely. I've seen examples of this at quite a few organizations. Not everyone needs to know everything, right? Not everyone is entitled to know everything. It might be above your pay grade. And not all employees are equipped, unfortunately, to understand the nuances of some tough business decisions without a 3-month lesson on, cost analysis and, all the financial goings on that make up some of those decisions. I think where transparency matters most is in doing what you say and being consistent and not being deceptive. So successful companies don't tell their employees that raises are on the way when they're financially struggling and about to implement a hiring freeze, right? They're not deceptive. Successful companies know how to articulate what they value, and they back it up with their actions. And they have the ability to articulate sometimes really complex topics without causing pain or deceiving their employees.
So what do you think, from a leadership perspective, what do leaders fear most about being transparent, especially, my generation? What are the fears that jump up and put a wall up for transparency?
I think it's exactly what we've been talking about. They're afraid they don't know how to articulate the complex information. They don't want to cause panic. They don't want to be misunderstood. So they just don't say anything. But unfortunately, in those situations, and especially with these younger generations, in a lack of information, they assume the worst. So unless you're telling them what's happening, they're going to fear the worst and just assume all the bad things and then move on. I think also another piece of it is there's a lack of faith from the top that their next in lines or their line managers are going to be able to articulate like their message. So me as a CEO, I roll it out to all of my team, but is my team going to be able to effectively roll it out to their teams? Not having that faith in your people is hard. So I think that it's important to slow down, right? These leaders need to connect with their teams. They need to make sure they understand the information and the messaging. They need to give them time to ask the questions that their staff might ask. And then as a cohesive leadership team, come up with the appropriate and consistent, truthful responses for those people. Because unless your entire team is on board with what the message is, it never goes over well. It's coming at the staff from 3 different angles. One manager just says, hey, no more overtime. Another manager says there's no more overtime because we're financially strapped. And you've got all the staff in a panic that now they can't pay their bills. The company's going under and I'm quitting, right?
That's so true. So let's look at the benefits of transparency in an organization. What are the couple of the best benefits that you see coming out of this?
Reduced turnover, engaged employees, an energized workforce. I think employees who feel like they can talk to their managers and leaders in the organization, and there's not a lot of drama about it, and they know that their messages aren't going to be, misinterpreted. They have faith in the company. I mean, it just builds a much more cohesive workforce.
Yeah, and for your HR teams that often are the foundation to encouraging leadership to be more transparent. What advice do you have for those HR professionals out here that are looking for ways to encourage their leadership to be more transparent?
I think from the HR standpoint, it's challenging because you have to build that good relationship with your chief officers, right? Whether you are at the chief officer level or not, you've got to be able to represent both the organization and the employees in a constructive way so that your executives have faith that the information you're giving them is sound, right? Like sometimes your executives are going to be terrified, right? They don't want to do this. They don't want to tell things. They don't want to show their cards. And it's tough. So in those situations, you have to act as the counselor for that executive, right? So one situation, my CEO, he did not have the courage of his convictions. We go back to 2020, there was a pandemic, there was a tumultuous election, there was race riots, there was all the things happening in the world at the same time. And my CEO wanted to make a statement to our organization. He wanted that we had people in some of these cities where our offices were closed and the building burned down, right? Like these were tumultuous times and tumultuous locations. So our CEO knew what he wanted to say, didn't know how to say it, and was afraid of saying some of the things, like a statement like Black Lives Matter. So he punted it to me. I was able to craft it from a point of what do the employees want to hear, punt it back to him for him to edit and put his tone and his language on it. We probably went back and forth 3 or 4 times. He eventually felt very, very comfortable with this and was excited to kind of put his message out to the company and then receive the feedback from people. But without HR's support of saying, these are the things you might not be thinking about. Let me help you get there. Let me help you be transparent in your communication in a way that's not going to offend and incite, right? But a way that's going to allow people to know what you believe.
Yeah. So let's assume I've got an organization that's operated for years with somewhat of a closed culture around this topic of transparency, but all of a sudden the leadership realizes realizes they need to shift their culture in the organization. Are there any suggested steps that you think best bring that organization to this path? And so how do you advise CEOs on that?
It's got to be modeled from the top, right? Like at the end of the day, CEO is king, essentially, right? If the leader of the organization is not modeling the behavior, it can't grow from the ground up. This is not one of those areas that the employees make the culture, right? If the employees are making a culture of transparency, but the executives are countering that, it just won't work. So I think if a executive, historically was afraid of this, but is now on board with it, HR just has to give them tools, tips and tricks for little wins. I used to be a nursery school teacher, right? So I used to tell my parents, you don't have to say no to Sally all the time, but when you say no, you have to mean it. Because if you don't, when Sally's 16, she's jumping on the back of a Harley and saying, "Bye, Dad, I'm going to the beach." And when you say no, then she's not going to believe you.
She's not going to listen. Yeah. So
it's the same thing with employees, right? You have to say what you mean, and it's got to start at the top. You don't have to tell them everything, but don't be deceptive. Be truthful. Be honest. Be empathetic, right? And if you don't understand maybe where they're coming from, maybe there's a huge class gap, maybe there's a huge compensation gap, maybe there's a huge, like we talked, generation gap, then you need to get people in your corner that can help guide you and counsel you so that you start to bridge those gaps.
Well, that's some great advice. So Sharon, it looks like we're coming up on our time today, but before we sign off, I'd like to ask you a question that I ask every guest, and that is, if S2 Verify were to conduct a background investigation on you, would there be any surprises?
No, I'm a rule follower at heart.
Yeah.
It would come back very quickly, though, because I've only ever lived in 3 locations.
Well, you know what? You're so right, because that actually is what drives the time on getting results in background investigations. The more somebody has moved, the more complex it is.
True story.
So that's great. Well, Sharon, I really appreciate your time talking about leadership and transparency today. Where can our audience keep up with you, and what's the best way for them to reach out?
I can always be found on LinkedIn or on my website at ohrconsult.com. There's a contact me link right there. But I hope this was informative. I really enjoyed it. This was a topic I could geek out on, so I probably talked too much.
No, you never talk too much. So, Sharon, thank you so much. And as we close off now, I'd like to have a minute with my partners, Bill and Jim at S2 Verify. Bill, if you were to give some mentoring or coaching advice to younger colleagues that we work with today, or just people you meet, what might you recommend to them as a thoughtful consideration as they begin their careers?
Well, really, I would suggest that they start their own company, because it's something I wish that we had done, much sooner in our life. But I guess from a professional standpoint, I would say, to Jim's point, work the problem. You're going to have problems, and it's hard not to get emotional about them. But, just continue to work the problem. Make sure that your supervisor, to your point, knows what's going on. Don't have any surprises whatsoever. So go early and often to, your supervisor to make sure that they understand what's going on. And then the other thing is just have a good work ethic. At the end of the day, you got to put in 50 or 60 hours when you start out. It's just part of the life, and you'll get ahead. If you're going to, only work 35 hours when you're supposed to be working 40, then you're going to, eventually it's going to end up biting you in the rear.
Yep. Jim, how about you?
Arnette, I take the same tack. The one thing that I've told my son, my daughter, I tell anyone I encounter, we have a culture that we want to choose the easy road. And I counter that to most people I talk to. And I always tell them, your greatest reward will come from choosing the most complex or the most, for lack of a better term, challenging path. You're going to have to work harder. You're going to have to work longer hours. You're going to learn more. You're going to accomplish more. And strangely enough, some of your greatest success, kind of alluding back to Billy, starting a company, is hard work. But if you look at what comes out of that, the success and the reward, far greater than going, well, I have these 4 paths to choose. This one's the easiest, I'll take it. And you'll accomplish your goal. It'll be relatively easy. And then you'll be looking for, what am I doing next? So I kind of hone in on take the most challenging path that's presented to you or put in front.
For our audience, please tune in next week when we continue our exploration of topics critical to success in HR. We'll see you then. And it goes without saying, let's get America back to work, because dreams only work if we do. Sharon, thanks so much. I look forward to staying in touch.
Thank you.
If you want to stay abreast of HR, recruiting, and hiring trends, tips, and tools, make sure you subscribe to America Back to Work. If you enjoyed this episode, leave us a rating and a review.